Welcome to this Routledge Enterprise Learning webinar. Our topic today is Organizational Transformation Starts with Leadership Agility, and our speaker is Dr. Ron Meyer.
I'm a professor of strategic leadership at the Tilburg University in the Netherlands. I'm actually also a professor of strategic leadership in Antwerp in Belgium, and I focus there very much on the link between leadership and how you mobilize people in organizations, particularly how you get them to develop, but also to implement strategies. So that's my focus area within the leadership field. But I actually only do that 2 days a week, because the other 3 days a week, I work for the Center for Strategy and Leadership. And that's an organization that works with companies in practice, mostly with management teams, to develop their strategy, to develop their leadership teams, and to develop their individual leadership themselves. I always feel that you should be connected to theory, but you also have to be connected to practice. So what I'd like to do is to share with you the approach to leadership which we're taking, because I think that one of the key reasons why you've tuned in is to understand what is the unique approach that we take. And there I think it's very important to clearly define our terms. So what do we mean by leadership? The term leadership is used quite loosely. I've noticed that quite a few organizations now publish their annual reports, and they'll talk about the leadership team. And to me, that's a misuse of the word leadership, because they actually mean the management team. So let's clarify what we mean by leadership. My simple definition, by the way, would be, you know that you're a leader if other people are following. And that's a very simple definition, but it clearly encapsulates what we should mean by leadership, that it is about getting other people to come along on a voyage. Leadership is about enticing other people and engaging other people to want to come along. And this is challenging to a lot of people, particularly when they get into their first management job or the second management job, where they go, now I have the position, now I can finally play the boss. And playing the boss is generally the worst way to actually motivate other people. So if you have any questions, remember, go ahead and post them. So if we use this definition of leadership, it also means that leadership is not only simply about leading down. I say to a lot of my students and the managers and the senior managers that I work with, actually leading down is probably the easiest, because people are looking to you and they're actually thinking, please don't manage me, try to lead me. So they're already expecting you, or hoping that you're going to lead, that you're going to appeal to them, that you're going to try to engage them. So if you do, you already have the benefit of the doubt. And if you do, they'll actually generally be quite happy about that. So we'll talk about leading down, but we'll also talk about leading across. How do you connect with your peers? How do you get other people in the management team or in your teams that you're working in? How do you get them to come along on the voyage? Ooh, that's generally a little bit more difficult. And very often you don't have any formal power. All you have is your influence. Or how about leading out to network partners, to suppliers, so to distributors, to anybody else that you need to, again, get on board? And you're probably already guessing, leading also goes up. So leading your boss, you might not think about that quite quickly, but it is very important to think about, but my boss doesn't have all of the answers either. So how can I get my boss to come along in a certain direction without triggering all types of ego issues, without being too arrogant, without seeming, say, insubordinate, but I'd still like to get my boss to come along in a certain direction. So we'll be talking about leadership 360. So it is really about thinking about all of the various stakeholders that you would like to influence and that you would like to bring along on the voyage. So when we talk about leadership development, so we also, with this type of view of leadership, we'll talk about leadership development in a moment, but I just want to check in with you and see if you have any questions about how we think about leadership at this moment. So Mark.
Yes,
Have we got any questions?
yes. As Ron says, do send your questions in. You can use the control panel to do that. Yes, one question for you, Ron. Is leadership born? Are leaders born, or are they made? Is it more natural for some people to be leaders than others?
I think it's a very, very good question. And I think a lot of people get mixed up because they'll look at heroic leaders and they'll very, very famous leaders, and they'll see so much talent and they think, wow, see, true leadership, that must be something that you're born with. But I think that we fool ourselves in that way. If you look at very, very famous cricket players, you say, well, if you get to the top of the league, you're probably very talented, you're born with certain talents. And that's probably true. Although don't forget, even the most talented person, if they don't work on developing that talent, they're never going to get to the top. But I would argue that all of us could learn to play cricket. It's not something that you need to be supernatural for. We might not all get to the very top, but we can probably learn to play a pretty decent game. It's the same thing with leadership. We don't have to become Mahatma Gandhi. We just need to be good enough leaders to be successful in our organizations. And that level of leadership is something that can be earned. And particularly because there's not just one way of being a leader. So when it comes to developing your influence, it is really about thinking about what are some of my strengths? What are the things that I'm good at? How could I actually try to engage those people? So it is about finding the style that suits with you. Of course, we'll talk about it in a moment. It's also about finding styles that suit with the other. But all of us can actually learn to be pretty good leaders, but we do need to work at it. Any other questions, Mark?
One more, and this is quite an interesting one. How important is image management to be an effective leader?
Ooh, that is very important. You have to realize that as we're discussing leadership now, if it's about informal power, it does mean that it's actually all depending on whether others want to trust you, if they want to follow you, if they think that if they come along on the voyage, it'll be worth their while. So it is very much about how others perceive you. I often say it's just like a car. If you can have a fantastic car, but the product will never sell itself. Most people can't really entirely judge the quality of a car. So the brand that you put on the car is very important. The brand has to reflect how good the car is, but the brand actually is a promise to others about, if you buy me, say you're going to get something really good. So you need to think about your own branding as a leader as well. If people see that brand and they trust that brand, if the promise is great, so they're going to come on board. Then they're going to find out that you're actually a good leader, and then they'll start building up even more trust. Focus on, in this program, we want to actually look at 5 different areas. We call them 5 different domains of leadership. So first, we would like to look at how you actually connect with other individuals. And this level of connecting with the individual, we call it interpersonal leadership. And I think that many of you will recognize this. As a leader, you need to coach. It is really about connecting with the other individual and how I can get that other individual to perform as best as possible. But we want to take people beyond only that one-on-one relationship. We want to get them to think about, I say here, it's not about being the boss. But we want people also to think about, how do I connect with an entire team, or with an entire unit, or maybe it's even the entire organization. And we call that organizational leadership. And there, your role as leader is that of the organizer. How do I get individuals organized for joint action? How do we get them to gel as a team? How do we make decisions as a team? It's not about being the hero, but it is about being effective as an organizer. It isn't only the individual that you need to motivate. Now, very often, even if you're a team lead for that team, you also need to develop a direction. You need to develop a strategy. So you might not be involved in corporate strategy, but you're involved in strategy at your own level. So that's also another challenge. And there you're engaged in strategic leadership. I need to set a direction. I need to get my team moving in that direction. I don't necessarily need to be a prophet who has all of the answers. Follow me, I know where the promised land is. But I do need to get my team engaged in thinking about where we want to head and what we want to achieve. So we'll be talking about each individual's role as a strategic leader as well. Now, more and more, we get younger people who want to have an answer to the question, why? Why do we exist as an organization? So basically, we also need to deal with some people's questions, but what's our mission? And there we call that your role as sense maker. So what mission gives meaning to people's work? You don't need to be the guru, so has all of the answers to the issues of life, but people are going to ask you as a leader, how are we making a difference? So why should I care? And as a leader, you should have an answer to that. And there's a fifth I mentioned, and you'll see that on the screen, there's no room at the bottom, so we'll go to the top. It's actually you as a leader and being a role model. So even before you interact with others, people are going to be looking to you and going to see how you behave, and that in itself is already going to be inspiring. So you don't need to be an idol that everyone looks up to, but you do want to be a role model that people are going to want to emulate, or at least they're going to say, hey, this person is walking the talk, and that's inspiring me to do that as well. And now you'll start seeing how we've structured the program. So we've structured it along these five, and for each of the domains, there are questions that you need to deal with as a leader, and we call those your leadership tasks. And so for instance, at the interpersonal level, if I'm dealing with the other individual, I would like to steer that person. I want to get them directed to a certain heading. So the question is, how do I steer them? And then there's what we call a leadership paradox. There's actually very often opposite ways of doing so. In this case, the paradox is that I'd like them to carry out certain types of activities, so I can focus on steering on the basis of the activities. These are the activities you should carry out. But I can also steer on the basis of setting certain types of conditions. I'll create the circumstances, and then they can figure out for themselves what type of activities are necessary. So the question is, which of these two should I actually focus on? Actually, these two gives you two opposite types of leadership styles. If you focus on the activities, making sure that people carry out the activities that you've defined, you have a supervisory leadership style. But if you focus on creating only the right conditions, and if these conditions are good enough to nudge people in a certain direction, you can say, I don't need to tell people what to do. I'll just let them loose, and I'll let the circumstances I've created lead them in the right direction. And we call that a facilitative leadership style. And of course, these are the black and white. You could call them the two opposite ends of a continuum. And then the question as a leader is, should I be focusing on one or the other, given the audience that I'm trying to steer? So we're really thinking through that there's not one best way. We shouldn't treat everybody in the same way. I need to be able to play around with what's going to be useful, given the person that I have in front of me and the situation that they're in. Do you see this logic? So if we look at a second type of interpersonal leadership task, say, I also need to give each individual some feedback, because without this feedback, I'm not going to be able to steer. But then again, if I start thinking about feedback, there's two opposite ways of giving feedback, depending on whether I want to focus on challenging people and say, wait a second, you can do better. This isn't good enough. You need to jump higher. Then I'm going to challenge them. But I can also show them appreciation and say, hey, this is already great. This is something you're doing particularly well. Build on this. So do I want to challenge or do I want to appreciate? Well, that means, of course, that we can also switch between leadership styles. I use a demanding leadership style. I'm going to focus on challenging them, jump higher. And if I use an encouraging leadership style, I can say, hey, you're doing a great job, build on that.